He dressed like a gentleman, spoke 5 languages, and could charm anyone in minutes. But behind that smile was the mind of a predator. Victor Lustig wasn't just a con artist. He was an artist of crime. He didn't rob banks with guns. He robbed millionaires with words. His victims handed him fortunes willingly, believing every elegant lie. And in the 1920s, he would commit his greatest scam of all, selling the Eiffel Tower, not once, but twice. But before we reach that legendary heist, we need to understand how an ordinary boy from Austria became the world's most dangerous gentleman thief. Because Victor Lustig didn't just wake up a criminal, he trained for it, like a scientist. Victor Lustig was born in Hostine, Austria-Hungary in 1890 to a middle-class family. He wasn't born into crime. In fact, he excelled in school, particularly in languages and psychology. But Victor had one weakness. He loved luxury. As a teenager, he discovered that charm opened more doors than honesty ever could. By the time he was 19, Victor spoke Czech, German, English, Italian, and French. And he used each language to slip into different identities. He began small: card tricks, rigged gambling tables, and swindling wealthy tourists on cruise ships. But Victor didn't just cheat people. He studied them. He once told a friend, "Every man has a hole in his armor. You just have to find it: greed, vanity, or fear." This philosophy became his greatest weapon. By his early 20s, Lustig was traveling Europe, frequenting high-class casinos. But he wasn't there to gamble. He was there to hunt. Victor's specialty was the money exchange scam. He would approach rich gamblers, offering to exchange large bills for smaller ones to help them tip casino staff. While counting, he'd distract them with conversation, slipping counterfeit notes or switching bills entirely. No one suspected him. He dressed impeccably, carried himself like nobility, and always smiled warmly. When caught, he laughed it off as a mistake, apologizing so convincingly that his victims often thanked him. By 1910, Lustig had built a reputation among Europe's underground circles. But he wanted bigger scores. And World War I gave him the perfect opportunity. During World War I, Europe was chaos. And chaos was Victor's playground. He posed as a soldier on leave, convincing families to invest in war bonds that didn't exist. He pretended to be a government official inspecting businesses, charging bribes to avoid military seizure of property. The boldest? He impersonated a ship captain, selling fake tickets to safe passage across the Atlantic. Desperate refugees paid fortunes only to find no ship waiting. Yet Victor rarely faced punishment. Why? Because he charmed even the police. He often used fake names, disappearing before authorities realized they'd been tricked. By the 1920s, Europe was too hot for him. Too many people recognized his face. So Victor headed for the land of opportunity: America. The Roaring Twenties were perfect for Victor Lustig. America was drowning in wealth. Stock markets boomed, luxury hotels overflowed with businessmen flashing cash, and no one imagined being scammed by a man who looked like a diplomat. Victor refined his act. He now carried a notebook of rules for success, which he reportedly shared with other con men. Among them, be a patient listener. It builds trust. Never look bored. Never boast. Let others talk about your achievements. Never get drunk. Never pry too deeply. People reveal more when you seem disinterested. With these rules, Victor became a master of psychological manipulation. He started selling fake investments, luxury properties he didn't own, and even worthless oil stocks to businessmen desperate for quick profits. But Victor wanted one scam that would make him legendary. Before he sold the Eiffel Tower, Lustig perfected a scam that made him rich: the infamous money box. Victor would present wealthy businessmen with a strange-looking wooden box, claiming it was a Romanian money printing machine. He would insert a $100 bill and blank paper, then slowly crank it. Out would come 2 identical $100 bills, one real, one fake. The trick? Victor had hidden real bills inside the machine beforehand. Greedy businessmen, believing they had a magical counterfeit machine, would pay tens of thousands of dollars for it. By the time they realized the trick, when the machine stopped working, Victor was long gone. This scam worked dozens of times. But Victor wanted more than money. He wanted fame, the kind criminals whispered about for generations. And in 1925 in Paris, he saw his chance. Paris in 1925 was struggling with Eiffel Tower maintenance costs. Newspapers printed stories complaining about how expensive the landmark was to repair. When Victor read this, inspiration struck. What if he convinced businessmen the government planned to sell the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal? It was crazy, impossible, and that's why it would work. Victor forged government documents, created fake official stationery, and even posed as a deputy director of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. He invited 6 of the richest scrap metal dealers in Paris to a private meeting at the Hôtel de Crillon. He told them the government wanted to sell the Eiffel Tower discreetly to avoid public outrage. His performance was flawless, polite, authoritative, and secretive. The dealers believed every word. One man, André Poisson, bit the bait hardest. Greedy and eager to outbid his rivals, he paid Victor a huge bribe to secure the contract. Within days, Victor left Paris with a suitcase of cash, and no one reported the scam. Poisson was too embarrassed to admit he'd been fooled. But Victor wasn't done. A month later, he returned to Paris to sell the Eiffel Tower again. That, buddy, is where we pick up in episode 2. The second sale of the Eiffel Tower, the boldest con in history, and how Victor Lustig pulled off the same impossible scam twice. If you're ready to see how he did it, and how close he came to being caught, stay tuned for the next chapter. Most con artists dream of pulling off one perfect scam. Victor Lustig did it twice. In 1925, Paris gasped when the Eiffel Tower, the pride of France, was almost sold as scrap metal. But the truth was worse. It wasn't almost sold. It was sold not once but twice by the same man using the same trick. This is the story of how Victor Lustig fooled Paris's richest men, vanished like a ghost, and returned to do it all over again, without ever spending a day in a French prison. And it begins with the perfect illusion. Victor Lustig wasn't just clever, he was observant. One morning in 1925, while sipping coffee at a Paris cafe, he read a newspaper article complaining about how expensive it was to maintain the Eiffel Tower. The article mentioned government officials debating whether the landmark should even stay standing. To most readers, it was just gossip. To Lustig, it was gold. He immediately saw an opportunity. If the public already believed the government might remove the tower, he could sell that rumor as reality. Victor once said, "A good con artist doesn't create greed. He plays with the greed already there." And Paris's scrap metal tycoons were greedy. Lustig crafted a flawless plan. He printed fake government documents on official stationery, complete with forged seals, naming him as a deputy director of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. He reserved a private suite at the luxurious Hôtel de Crillon and sent confidential invitations to 6 of Paris's wealthiest scrap metal dealers, claiming they had been selected for a secret government deal. When they arrived, Victor greeted them like a true official. Tailored suit, polished shoes, and that charming diplomatic smile. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Gentlemen, the government has decided to dismantle the Eiffel Tower and sell it for scrap. The decision is politically sensitive, so secrecy is vital. The man who wins this contract will become very, very rich." The dealers were stunned, but none dared question him. His papers looked real. His confidence was unshakable. Victor didn't push them to bid immediately. Instead, he gave them a private tour of the Eiffel Tower itself. With official-looking badges, Victor and his buyers toured the Eiffel Tower, escorted by hired fake security guards he had bribed. He pointed at rust spots and worn-out beams, saying things like, "Gentlemen, you can see why this masterpiece has become a burden. The government can no longer afford its upkeep." The dealers nodded, imagining tons of iron and steel they could resell for millions. Victor watched their faces carefully, studying who was the most eager, who was the most desperate, and who would pay the highest bribe. One man stood out, André Poisson, a newcomer to the scrap industry, desperate to prove himself. Poisson asked timidly, "Monsieur Lustig, I trust this is legitimate? The press would destroy me if I looked foolish." Victor smiled reassuringly. "Monsieur Poisson, you've been chosen because of your discretion. But naturally, government officials expect some personal incentives for approving such contracts." It was the perfect hook. Poisson was ready to pay. Within days, Victor met Poisson privately, accepting a huge bribe to secure the contract. Poisson handed over cash willingly, believing he was about to own the Eiffel Tower's scrap rights. Victor thanked him warmly, promised official documents would be delivered, and left Paris the same night, catching a train to Vienna with a suitcase full of cash. By the time Poisson realized he'd been conned, Victor was long gone. But here's the genius. Poisson never reported the scam. Why? Because admitting he'd been tricked would ruin his reputation and business. Victor had counted on this shame. He could have stopped there. Most con men would. But Victor was different. He came back. A month later, Victor returned to Paris, staying at the same luxury hotel, wearing the same diplomatic suit, and sending out the same secret invitations. This time to a different group of dealers. He ran the scam again, exactly as before. But there was a difference. Paris was now buzzing with quiet rumors about the first scam. Some businessmen whispered about an Eiffel Tower deal, but none dared speak publicly. Victor sensed suspicion and canceled the deal at the last moment, claiming the government had postponed the sale. He left before anyone could confront him. Still, He kept the bribes offered to secure positions in the bidding. Even without completing the second sale, he made another small fortune. And just like that, Victor Lustig disappeared again. Untouchable. News of the Eiffel Tower scam eventually leaked, but no one ever dared prosecute him. His victims stayed silent to avoid public humiliation. Victor's reputation skyrocketed in the criminal world. Other con artists called him the Count because of his refined style. He had fooled Europe's wealthiest men, stolen small fortunes without firing a bullet, and humiliated the pride of France. But Lustig wasn't done. America was calling, and Victor had an even more dangerous target in mind. His next victim? Al Capone himself. And in the final chapter, we'll reveal how Victor Lustig conned the most feared gangster in history, and how his luck finally ran out. If this chapter amazed you, hit like, share this unbelievable story with a friend, and comment your favorite moment. Because in the final chapter, we uncover how Victor scammed Al Capone, tricked banks with his money box, and how the world's greatest con artist was finally caught. He sold the Eiffel Tower. He robbed millionaires without a gun. And then he did the impossible. He scammed Al Capone. But even the greatest con artist has a weakness. For Victor Lustig, it wasn't greed. It wasn't arrogance. It was fate. This is how the world's smoothest criminal rose to legendary status, fooled the most dangerous gangster in America, and then fell in a way even he couldn't talk his way out of. After his Eiffel Tower scams, Victor Lustig vanished into Europe for a while. But by 1926, he was ready for bigger prey. And that meant America. The Roaring Twenties were perfect for him. Gangsters ran cities, stock markets boomed, and people were hungry for quick money. Victor landed in New York under one of his many fake identities. He introduced himself as Count Victor Lustig, a charming European aristocrat with tales of old-world wealth. Within weeks, he was mingling with politicians, bankers, and mobsters. Everyone trusted him because he looked too sophisticated to be a criminal. But Victor didn't just want rich businessmen now. He wanted the king of crime himself, Al Capone. Conning Al Capone was suicide for most men. But Victor understood Capone's weakness: greed and trust in men who looked clean. Lustig approached Capone with a bold proposition. He claimed he had an investment opportunity that could double Capone's money in 2 months. All he needed was $50,000, a huge sum at the time. Capone agreed, expecting huge returns. Victor took the money, placed it untouched in a safe, and disappeared for 2 months. Then he returned looking frustrated and apologetic. "Mr. Capone, the deal fell through. I'm sorry for wasting your time. Here's your full $50,000 back." Capone stared at him, shocked. No one had ever returned money to him. Convinced Victor was an honest man, Capone gave him a $5,000 thank you for his integrity. Victor walked away grinning. He hadn't risked the investment at all. He had conned Capone with nothing but trust. With his new reputation as a trustworthy businessman, Victor expanded his famous Romanian money printing box scam. The box, made of polished wood with dials and cranks, seemed to duplicate banknotes using chemical solutions. Victor demonstrated by inserting a $100 bill and blank paper. Hours later, the machine printed another identical $100 bill. The secret? Victor had already hidden real bills inside, releasing them one by one. Greedy businessmen and corrupt bankers paid tens of thousands for the machine, believing they could make millions. By the time they realized it was fake, Victor had vanished. One banker lost $60,000. Another nearly bankrupted himself trying to fix the machine. Victor simply moved to a new city each time. For years, Victor traveled between New York, Chicago, and New Orleans, leaving a trail of bankrupt victims. But by the early 1930s, the FBI and Secret Service were closing in. The Great Depression changed everything. Desperate people complained to authorities, and Lustig's name finally landed on federal watch lists. His downfall began with a mistake. His girlfriend, Billie Mae, betrayed him. Angry after a fight, she tipped off police, giving them details of his operations. On May 10, 1935, Victor was arrested in New York. When agents searched him, they found a list of 50 wealthy victims, dozens of fake passports, and thousands in counterfeit bills. Even in handcuffs, Victor smiled politely and said, "Gentlemen, this is only a misunderstanding." But this time, no charm could save him. Before his trial, Victor pulled off one last trick. He convinced guards to allow him a medical checkup outside prison, claiming he had tuberculosis. While being transported, he changed into a sheriff's uniform hidden under his coat, calmly walked out of the building, and disappeared into New York streets. For 30 days, he stayed free, living in luxury hotels under fake names. But luck ran out. He was captured again in Pittsburgh after being recognized by a police officer who had studied his photographs. This time, the government made sure he wouldn't escape. In 1935, Victor Lustig was sentenced to 20 years in Alcatraz, America's toughest prison. Inmates called him the Count, still respecting his intelligence. He spent his days quietly, reading books and teaching other prisoners languages. Even hardened criminals admired him, because he never used violence, only wit. In 1947, Victor died of pneumonia in a prison hospital at age 57. When asked to list his occupation on his death certificate, officials recorded what Victor had once told them with a sly smile. Apprentice, salesman. Victor Lustig wasn't just a criminal. He was a master psychologist, a man who turned human greed into his greatest weapon. He sold the Eiffel Tower. He conned Al Capone. And he left behind a legend that still inspires stories today. Because in the end, the greatest con isn't stealing money. It's making people give it to you willingly. If this story amazed you, hit like, comment your favorite scam, and share this video with someone who loves unbelievable history. And for more stories of legends, lies, and forgotten truths, subscribe to HistoryMind, where history's wildest tales are never buried.